Blood on the Bayou, the Axeman Terror. The year is 1918, and the Great War is raging across the globe. While most of humanity is focused on the carnage occurring overseas, a new horror is just beginning stateside. During this time period, one of the worst natural disasters in U.S. history is about to unfold with the deadly flu pandemic. And right when it seems things can't get any worse, residents of New Orleans are stalked by a mysterious killer who will go on a months-long rampage, murdering nearly a dozen people in cold blood. This is our channel, and today we're going to look at the strange case of the Axeman killer. But a quick reminder before we get into it. Remember to stay updated with the latest from us here at the channel. May 1918, near the city of New Orleans, Louisiana, a young couple is awoken in the middle of the night by loud screams coming from outside their home. Though they live in a relatively isolated area, whoever is out there certainly isn't afraid to make themselves heard. When they look out the window, they see the silhouette of a man standing over the body of someone lying on the ground in front of their house. The man is holding a large axe, which he raises high above his head and brings down onto the victim with all his might. The couple quickly pull back from the window and lock it before hiding under the bed. Soon the sounds of footsteps recede into the distance, and the couple is left shaken but unharmed. When they finally emerge from their hiding spot, they discover that their neighbor has been brutally murdered. Over the next few months, similar scenes would play out across New Orleans. In total, around 12 people would be killed during the Axeman's rampage, though many more would be injured. But what linked these attacks, and why did the killer seemingly target innocent people in their own homes? In order to understand the motives behind the attacks, it's important to first learn more about the victims. Most of those killed were Italian-American grocers who lived in the uptown section of New Orleans. For some reason, the Axemen seemed to have a particular distaste for this group of people. Of the 12 confirmed victims, 10 were Italian-American men who made their living running small neighborhood grocery stores. The other 2 victims were a husband and wife who lived across the street from one of the grocer's victims. Other than these 2, none of the victims knew each other, which makes it all the more bizarre that the killer chose them. But despite the victims' similarities, there was one major difference. Every single one of them was an enemy of the mob. You see, during the early 20th century, New Orleans was largely controlled by the mafia, and these Italian grocers were known for refusing to pay protection money to organized crime groups. The mafia had demanded that the grocers allow criminals to sell illegal substances in their stores, but when the grocers refused, the mob began to harass them, forcing them to close up shop. So when the brutal killings began, many people believed that the Axeman was simply hired muscle sent to punish the grocers. However, this doesn't explain why the killer only attacked these grocers, or why he sometimes took their axes and left behind no other clues. As far as the murders themselves, it seemed the Axeman went to great lengths to ensure his victims were dead before taking their axes and leaving. He would often sneak into residents' homes through unlocked doors or open windows, and then proceeded to hack his victims to pieces while they slept. It was almost as if he wanted them to suffer as much as possible. If the residents were lucky enough to survive the initial attack, the Axeman would return later to finish them off. Sometimes the killer would take trophies from the crime scene, such as the axes, which added another layer of mystery to the case. Perhaps the strangest aspect of the Axeman killings was a warning letter that was published in local newspapers on March 13, 1919. In the letter, which is now known as the Jazz Funeral Letter, the Axeman claimed responsibility for the killings and boasted that he would spare anyone who played jazz music in their home that night. According to the letter, the Axeman could be heard dancing to jazz music in the streets after killing his victims, and he felt that those who played jazz in their homes deserved to be spared from his wrath. With this warning, the Axeman essentially gave the residents of New Orleans a choice: either play jazz music or risk being murdered in your sleep. Though many people likely scoffed at the letter at first, it quickly caused a city-wide panic. People were terrified to go to sleep, fearing that they would be attacked and killed by the crazed Axeman. In response to the threat, many people spent the night listening to jazz music or singing and talking loudly to avoid being seen as an easy target. Others took extra precautions, like boarding up their windows or hiring armed guards to watch over them as they slept. To this day, it is unknown whether or not anyone actually followed the Axeman's orders and played jazz music that night. However, regardless of whether they did or not, the strategy seemed to work. The Axeman was never seen again, and the killings abruptly came to an end. As the investigation continued over the next several years, police began to theorize that the killings may have been committed by a serial killer named George Kelly, also known as the Jersey Joe. However, there was never any solid evidence to support this claim, and the Axeman would forever remain unidentified. Aside from the axe, the killer left behind almost no other clues. He didn't leave behind any fingerprints, and there were no witnesses who could describe what he looked like. Police did find an axe in one of the crime scenes that matched the description of one that was stolen from one of the victims' homes, but it was never definitively proven to be the murder weapon. Another interesting piece of evidence was a bloody footprint that was found at one of the crime scenes. However, when police examined the print, they discovered that it belonged to a woman. This led them to question whether or not the killer might have had an accomplice, but this theory was never proven either. To this day, the case of the Axeman remains one of the most perplexing mysteries in New Orleans history. There are many theories surrounding the killings, but nothing has ever been confirmed. Some believe the Axeman was a serial killer who specifically targeted grocers because they were easier to kill than other businesses. Others believe the attacks were committed by members of organized crime who wanted to punish the grocers for not paying protection money. Still, others believe the attacks were simply the work of a random opportunist who used the grocers' axes to cover his tracks. While we may never know for sure what motivated the Axeman to do what he did, one thing is certain: his crime shocked the nation and left an indelible mark on New Orleans history. The story of the Axeman has become part of local lore and has inspired countless true crime stories and fictional works. Perhaps most fittingly, the Axeman has become something of a folk hero in New Orleans jazz culture, with musicians often paying tribute to him in their songs and performances. One New Orleans jazz musician even claimed to have encountered the Axeman himself, describing him as a tall, thin black man with a red handkerchief tied around his neck. According to the musician, the Axeman invited him to join him on his nightly strolls through the city, where they would listen to the sounds of jazz echoing from the homes of the unsuspecting residents. Though terrifying to most, the Axeman's warning letter gave jazz musicians a sense of purpose, knowing that they were helping to protect their fellow New Orleanians from harm. What do you think happened to the Axeman? Do you think he met his demise in a hail of bullets, or did he escape justice and live out his remaining days listening to the sounds of jazz in the Big Easy? Let us know in the comments below. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe to our channel for more videos like this.